Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle, and your host, me, as you probably guessed, Larry Erickson. And for the next almost half hour, I guess, I'm going to be talking about some things that haven't been in the top of the news, but that I think are worthy of you knowing about, worthy of you thinking about. If you have any reactions to the show, you can always email them to me directly. My personal email, this is my email, is whoviating, whoviating at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here somewhere for a couple times during the show. You can get the email address from there if you missed it, or you can leave a comment there. And as always, if you do send me email, just two requests. One, please include something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam. And two, be a little patient about getting an answer because I just hate answering email, but I will, and you will get an answer. All right, with that, we're going to start with some very bits of good news like we like to, but it's a little different this week. All the good news seems to have not good news attached to it. So we're going to start with this bit of good news, which is that on March 30th, California lawmakers passed 11 gun control bills, passed them on to Governor Jerry Brown's desk. These were sparked by San Bernardino, but given urgency by Orlando. Well, just a few days ago, Brown signed 6 of them into law. They included one that said that ammunition sellers need licenses and buyers would have to pass background checks. Now, there's regulating ammo, like we regulate guns. The possession of magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds is now banned. The manufacture and sale of such magazines in California already was, but now the possession is as well. It expands the definition of assault weapon to include specified guns with military-style features such as detachable magazines, and it tightened up the definition and toughened the definition of what constitutes detachable because gun manufacturers have been trying to evade the previous definition. It puts limits on to who a gun owner can lend their gun. And it also makes it a misdemeanor to file a false report that a gun has been stolen or lost. Now, there is a sort of potential dark cloud here that appears in the response to this. It's just something I'm going to mention quickly just because it's something we always need to bear in mind when we're talking about these issues. One particularly wacko gun rights group called these measures constitutionally illegitimate laws passed by a patently illegitimate government acting in Stalin-esque fashion. Now, this obviously could just be bluster, but the important point here is to remember that when you call a government illegitimate, you are saying that you are under no obligation to follow its laws. Don't forget that. In any event, ultimately, this is good news because it proves again that, yes, we can pass gun control. Yes, guns can be regulated. Now, the not good news about this is wondering, as we expand background checks to include ammunition, just how much good that might do. There is a fundamental problem about background checks, which neither current practice nor proposed laws address. This is the words of author Bob Sullivan writing at credit.com, and I'm quoting him. At a time when Little League volunteers are forced to submit to fingerprints and online banking customers must answer arcane questions should they forget their passwords, there is essentially no modern identity verification conducted as part of a gun transaction. The simplest forms of identity theft can foil the process nearly 100% of the time. In other words, he said, it's easier to lie and get a gun in America than it is to lie to get a credit card. The so-called background checks, they consist of little more than the buyer filling out a form and offering some form of ID. Prosecutions for lying on that form are almost non-existent. Now, some states, such as Maryland, New Jersey, and New York, have added requirements for verifying identity. Those 3, in fact, require fingerprints, but many do not. Which, bottom line, means that in the vast majority of states in this country, there, for practical purposes, is essentially no penalty for lying on a background check. And our much vaunted, everybody agrees on it, gun control of background checks may not actually accomplish very much. The fact is, playing around the edges of gun control hasn't worked and won't work, and it's time to stop playing nice with the fanatics and the fronts for gun makers and label them for what they are. It's time to delegitimize the whole idea of owning a gun, and it's time to care about this as much as the fanatics and the fronts do. Because ultimately, that is the only way we will make a difference. And is that the only way we can stop our current practice of lurching from massacre to massacre against the background of the steady meat grinder of thousands upon thousands of people dying by gun every year. All right, now next up, there's another bit of good news. This actually relates to LGBTQ rights, and it comes from an odd place. Pakistan. Pakistan, which is ruled under Sharia law, is a place where the rights of transgender people are actually advancing. In 2011, they obtained the right to vote. In 2012, the nation's Supreme Court declared they had equal rights, including the right to inherit property and assets. And now a fatwa, which is a religious judgment, a religious ruling, signed by 50 clerics, says that marriage between transgender individuals is admissible under Islam, and that people have a right to be buried in Muslim ceremonies. Now, more specifically, the fatwa said, quoting, "It is permissible for a transgender person with male identifications on his body to marry a transgender person with female identifications on her body. Also, normal men and women can also marry such transgender people as have clear indications on their body." Unfortunately, it didn't say what those indications might be. And unfortunately, what's more, the group that issued the fatwa, which is the Tanzim Ittihad el-Ummat, is not well known. But the fact is, this remains a sign of progress. Now, this doesn't mean all is well or soon will be. Transgender folks in Pakistan are routinely harassed, discriminated against, and in some cases subjected to violence just because they're transgender. The BBC noted that in one province, 45 transgender Pakistanis were killed in the course of just 2 years, and many are routinely denied medical treatment and employment. Still, in some ways, transgender people have it easier under Sharia law than gays and lesbians do. Being gay, lesbian, or bisexual in a number of Arab countries, including, for example, Saudi Arabia, carries a death sentence. In Pakistan, homosexual couples can't marry, and homosexual men have often been prosecuted under anti-sodomy laws. But being transgender is treated with a little more, let's call it nuance, for lack of a better term, based on an interpretation of an ambiguous statement in the Quran that suggests that transgender people are the way they are because Allah intended them to be that way. So that, as this new fatwa put it, again quoting, "Thinking of them as inferior is against Sharia law because such an act amounts to objecting to one of Allah's creations." Now, that particular nuance, in fact, is reflected in this fatwa, which, despite saying that those with the proper male or female indications can marry each other, it also says that marrying somebody with both male and female indications is against Islamic principles. Bottom line here, though, is that activists in Pakistan have called this religious edict a promising step forward and an opportunity to address the harassment and violence faced by the transgender community in Pakistan, and that surely is good news. The not good news on this front comes from here at home in the United States, specifically the state of North Carolina. You may recall that North Carolina passed one of those so-called bathroom bills, making it a crime for someone to use a public restroom or similar facility with a designation that does not match the person's biological identity as stated on their birth certificate. A surge of anger followed, including threats of boycotts, loss of business, including potentially losing the NBA All-Star game, and a threat by the Obama administration to withhold funding on the grounds that this law violated federal anti-discrimination laws. Now, under a lot of pressure, the governor of North Carolina responded by trying to explain the law, and the legislature responded by very grudgingly fashioning a new bill to fix the old one. There's only one problem here. The fix may make things worse. It does do one good thing. It removes a part of the bill that blocked North Carolinians from suing in state court for employment discrimination, because even the Goppers admitted that was going too far. It also said it would bring the state's anti-discrimination laws in line with federal policies, federal standards. But there's no guarantee, of course, that meant that the state would agree with the Justice Department's interpretation of those laws that they cover LGBTQ people. And in fact, based on behavior, it's likely that North Carolina would say, no, we don't agree with that interpretation, so this would still leave LGBTQ people unprotected. Creepily, this law proposes to establish a registry of people who have had sex reassignment surgery. Apparently, this is supposed to protect transgender folks from running afoul of the bathroom parts of the bill. But what it actually does is to raise privacy concerns in a state where state legislators have compared transgender people to sex offenders. Oh, and why is such a registry supposedly needed? Because the parts of the bill about using public facilities, the parts that sparked the anger in the first place, are unchanged. You know the saying about you can put a lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig? You can dress up bigotry in the language of non-discrimination, but it's still bigotry. Speaking of bigotry, and actually still on LGBTQ front, back in March, Mississippi passed probably the worst of the so-called religious freedom bills intended to allow active discrimination against LGBTQ people. Essentially, this bill would permit any person, which the law defined as including any closely held entity, including closely held corporations and businesses, to refuse any service to anyone who violates their supposedly sincerely held religious beliefs. It means that public employees, businesses, social workers cannot be punished for denying services of any kind based on the idea that marriage is between a man and a woman. Or who have the idea that sex is reserved for such a marriage, or who say that gender is determined at birth. It means the government can't prevent businesses from firing transgender people. They can't prevent clerks from refusing to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. They can't prevent adoption agencies from refusing to place a child with an unmarried couple. This law even explicitly allows employers to set gender-specific dress codes. As New York Magazine's Claire Linsbaum wrote, the bill permits so many acts that it's impossible to sum them up. It is a truly terrible, horrible bill. So what's the good news here? On July 1st, U.S. District Court Judge Carlton Reeves smacked down this exercise in egregiousness in no uncertain terms and what Mississippi Today described as a blistering opinion that reached into Mississippi's segregationist past. Reeves wrote that the bill does not honor our tradition of religious freedom, nor does it respect the equal dignity of all of Mississippi's citizens. He said it was intended to benefit some citizens at the expense of others, and ultimately it was, he said, the state's attempt to put LGBT citizens back in their place as second-class citizens. Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant said he looks forward to an aggressive appeal, but other observers have said such an appeal, in the words of one, would be a waste of time, money, and any credibility the state has on human rights matters, which has never been much to begin with. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. described Mississippi as sweltering in the heat of oppression. It seems the description is still accurate. Happily, there are again those who will stand in the way. What's unhappy here, by the way, and not good news, is, of course, this law was far from the only example of homophobia of late. In the wake of Orlando, for example, there was plenty of it, such as Roger Jimenez, the not really a pastor of that not really a Baptist church in Sacramento, who expressed unrestrained glee that 50 pedophiles had been shot down, and the pastor somewhere in the darker parts of Texas, one Donnie Romero, who said he was praying for the survivors to die. But, of course, it is important to always to remember, homophobia is not the only sort of bigotry to which our society is heir and prone. So just a couple of quick reminders here. One about racism, for example. And now, very often, the thing with racism is that sometimes the bigotry is not obvious. It's hidden. It's unconscious. You're unaware. There's a recent study addressing this. It was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, and it indicated that implicit racial bias negatively affects not only how physicians deal with and communicate with their patients, but also by that very means also affects how patients view their treatment plans. Researchers had 18 non-black cancer doctors complete an implicit racial bias measure. This is a measure intended to reveal racial bias of which you are not consciously aware. They were then paired with 112 new black cancer patients at various hospitals in Detroit. The study found that the doctors whose measure results indicated an implicit racial bias spent less time with their patients, as a result of which patients could not fully recall the interaction with the doctors and indicated lowered confidence in recommended treatments. This is just the latest. It's far from the first, it's just the latest example to show precisely this, to show that racial bias itself and the effect it has on the dealings between the medical profession and patients, that implicit racial bias is one cause of the disparity in health outcomes between whites and blacks. Now, it would be nice if this study was the one that managed to do what none of the earlier ones have, to spark the medical profession and medical schools into taking this seriously enough to include it in part of physician training, but we'll have to wait and see. But while sometimes bias is hidden, sometimes it's just right out there. Louis Ackle, sheriff of Iberia Parish in Louisiana, has been indicted for directing the beatings of inmates in the parish jail's chapel. The beatings done there because there aren't any security cameras in the chapel. Well, it develops that in a recorded conversation, Ackle refers to a federal prosecutor as, quoting, "this sorry son of a bitch Jew bastard in Washington," and claimed that when the prosecutor wanted him to give information on others, he said to the prosecutor, and again I'm going to quote, except some of the words you have to expand in your own mind because I'm not supposed to say them here. He said to the prosecutor, "the only thing I'm going to give you, effing shoot you right between your G-damn Jewish eyes." Right. On that note, let's take a break. And we're back. And so I tell you what, let's move from the ancient bigotries of racism and anti-Semitism to our more modern mania for Islamophobia. I can have an example of that. On June 29th, a desk clerk in Avon, Ohio, got flustered because a man in the lobby, dressed in traditional Arabic robes, was talking on a cell phone. She texted relatives who called 911, claiming that she had heard him pledging support to Daesh, that is ISIS. Police came, saw the man, and without asking him anything or for any sort of ID, they drew their guns, forced him to the ground, handcuffed him, and searched him. Turned out that his name is Ahmed al-Manhali, and he's a businessman for the United Arab Emirates who was looking for directions, because he was in Ohio because he was going to nearby Cleveland for medical treatment after suffering a stroke. It also turned out, I know you're terribly surprised by this, he hadn't said anything about ISIS. And of course, in fact, how would the clerk know if he was talking about ISIS since he was speaking Arabic? But, oh, wait a minute, that was the cause, wasn't it? Yes, he's a man in Arabic clothing, in Arabic clothing, speaking Arabic on a cell phone. He must be a terrorist. What else could he be? Now, Avon Mayor Brian Jensen is his name. He issued a statement on Sunday apologizing for the incident, which is good. But he also said that the cops had followed their department's standard response protocol. Approach with guns drawn, forcing him to the ground, handcuffing him, searching him, all as their initial response before they even ask him anything? That is standard response protocol? Good gosh, what would have happened if they were truly worried? Now, the clerk here has been fired and may be facing charges of having prompted a false police report. But in a lot of ways, you really kind of feel sorry for her. I mean, why shouldn't she have felt concerned? Why shouldn't she have been afraid? Why shouldn't she have had terrorists, the first thing that came into her mind? We're pretty much told that constantly in the media. Be afraid, they're out to get us, they're going to kill us. Be afraid, be very afraid. The American Friends Service Committee did a study of 3 months of media coverage of extremism, covering over 600 news items from 20 different U.S. news outlets. One of the things they discovered was that 90% of the time in talking about any incident involving extremism, media outlets also mentioned Islam, even when Islam had absolutely nothing to do with what they were covering in that news item. Now, consider a few recent news items, okay? June 17th, 2 brothers were arrested after police officers raided their Long Island home. Items seized include $42,000 in cash, 6 assault rifles, a handgun, a shotgun, 4 rifles, a stun gun, various Nazi paraphernalia, and a black binder with instructions on how to build bombs. Second, on June 21st, police arrested 3 self-proclaimed anti-drug vigilantes as they were about to enter the Holland Tunnel, connecting Jersey City, New Jersey with Lower Manhattan. They were carrying drugs, 5 loaded handguns, an AR-15, a shotgun, 4 knives, 10 loaded clips of ammo, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and a military-grade helmet. Third, on June 23rd, FBI agents in Utah arrested one Bill Keebler, charging him with attempting to blow up a federal building, specifically the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management facility in Mount Trumbull, Arizona. He had asked one of the federal agents who had infiltrated his so-called Patriots Defense Force to make a pipe bomb for him, which he then took and, yes, did try to use to blow up that building. The bomb, of course, was a fake one supplied by the FBI, and he was arrested. Okay, maybe you heard about some of those incidents. Maybe you did. Maybe you heard some of them. Maybe you heard all of them. Maybe you heard about none of them. But here's the question, and you already know the answer. How would the media have treated these same incidents? How widespread would the coverage have been? How insistent and loud and intense would the coverage have been if any of the people involved had been named, I don't know, Muhammad? And that even before finding out if they were Muslim or not. You know the answer to that question. It really is no wonder why some hotel clerk could not wind up seeing a terrorist in every Arab with a cell phone. I have talked, I don't know how many times, about how we are uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our major media. And it's not just on matters like fear-mongering about terrorism. It's on almost anything that relates to the structure of social and economic power in our society. And here's an example of what I mean. And it's going to take a little explanation because the point is not obvious, so bear with me. Economist Mark Toma, writing from the Money Watch blog, which is on CBS News website, talks about the economic disease eating away at the U.S. This disease, he said, is declining productivity. Quoting him, "It is likely no coincidence at a time of diminishing standards of living for millions of Americans that the country's productivity, defined in textbooks as worker output per hour of labor, is decreasing. Recent data suggests that pattern is likely to continue for some time." Okay, the very next sentence is, over the first 3 months of the year, that is 2016, over the first 3 months of the year, productivity increased 0.6%. So just 2 sentences after saying that productivity is decreasing, he says it's going up. And this is not just a single quarter spike. He also says that productivity increased at an average rate of 2.3% a year from 1990 to 2008 and 1.1% per year following that. So productivity is going up, and it has been going up. But here's the thing, here's the trick. Productivity has been going up, but it's not going up as fast as it was. What's going down is not productivity, but the rate of increase in productivity. And to our corporate economy, that means productivity is declining. Consider this, okay? To understand this, imagine you're working for a business producing widgets at a rate of 100 per worker hour. All right, they find some efficiencies in distribution and so on, and so the next year they're able to increase output to 105 widgets per worker hour. Next year there's a little more efficiency in one thing or another, and they're able to increase it to 110 widgets per worker hour. So each year there's been an increase in 5 widgets per hour of five widgets per worker hour. But wait, got to remember, productivity from year 1 to year 2 went from 100 to 105. That's a 5% increase. Productivity from year 2 to 3 went from 105 to 110. That's only a 4.8% increase. Oh my God, according to people like Toma, productivity at that plant is declining. And if that makes no sense to you, it shouldn't. But it's revealing. It's revealing about how the corporate basis of our economy thinks about that economy. Now, the suggestions Toma actually raises in this to deal with this are better than the usual response, which is, trim the fat, which translates to throw people out of work. But at the end of it all, this notion still ignores the monster in the room, the nature of the economy itself, as demonstrated by the logic of this very column. A nature which requires not only constant growth, but constantly accelerating growth. You not only have to make more, this year's more has to be more than last year's more. You can't just increase productivity, you have to increase it faster and faster. And people may not be aware of those kind of economic details and definitions, but they're starting to catch on. They're catching on that the economy is rigged. A new Marketplace Edison research poll showed, that was published June 28th, showed that 71% of respondents agree that the U.S. economy is rigged in favor of some. That majority opinion held across ethnicity, class, age, and gender. Nearly 60% agreed that Wall Street does more to hurt average Americans than it does to help, and 56% agreed that the government should break up the big banks. 54% felt that the decline in U.S. manufacturing jobs was a result of so-called free trade deals. People are catching on. They are starting to understand, if only in their gut. As a result of this kind of new understanding, a different recent poll found that only 6% of Americans think their finances will improve after the November elections, no matter who wins. In fact, that survey found that most Americans expect their financial situations at best to remain the same. 24% think it's going to get worse, no matter who wins. And one of the reasons they said is because neither major party candidate is addressing issues of interest to voters like income, access to credit, interest rates, and affordable housing. They are not talking about the things that really affect people's day-to-day lives. And people are starting to catch on that, yes, it is rigged. And they're doing it in spite of being uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our major media. That's it for this week. Whole bunches of stuff I didn't talk about. Hopefully I'll get to some of it next week. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, for now, peace.